Anthroprimus claimed responsibility for what was described as a dirty bomb, an explosive device composed of fissile material gathered from a rod from a nuclear power plant near Cleveland that had been abandoned. The U.S. government had been searching for the missing rod since the cruel summer began. Somehow, it wound up with the terrorists, who claimed that they were cleansing Canada of alien domination. They threatened that they would unleash more dirty bombs unless Canada voted against incorporation. The threat did not work. What was supposed to be a close election turned out to be a landslide in favor of incorporation. There were no retaliatory attacks, as Canadian and American law enforcement captured the terrorist cell. I had learned this while convalescing at the hospital aboard a T-3 transport in orbit. My injuries were significant. However, between the network and proper medical care, my recovery was quick. The regional manager came up to see how I was recovering, and he assured me that the nanites were currently now being introduced to everyone in Maple Leaf, and that they were already showing signs of rapid recovery. That was considered remarkable even by Consortium doctors. Apparently, human physiology was more adaptive to nanites than with us Greys. That meant, along with Sandeep and hundreds of thousands of others, Jake, who had been exposed like me, would be fine. I wanted to contact Jake the moment I was lucid enough so I could ascertain how he was recovering and perhaps just hear his gravelly voice. However, he was never provided with a device that could connect with our fleet in orbit. So, against medical advice, I took the next shuttle to Calgary as soon as I could walk. After touching down, the hatch opened, and I was surprised to find that the shuttle did not land at some far-off field, but rather, we arrived at a new terminal at Calgary International Airport, and we were parked alongside several other cargo shuttles, delivering badly needed equipment that had been severely rationed until the plebiscite. When I stepped off the platform, I expected to find Jake leaning beside his pickup truck, but instead, I was greeted by another human. His name was Lorne, and he stood by a K car. I asked where Jake was, and Lorne gave me a confused look.
Didn't they tell you?
Tell me what?
Jake, he was exposed to lethal levels of radiation.
Yes, but we have authorized the deployment of nanites. If there is any bureaucratic delay, I will...
Ma'am, he has refused treatment.
I stood there, unable to reply for several seconds. Finally, I asked, "Is he alive?" Lorne nodded.
For now. I don't know for how much longer, though. I'm really sorry about this, ma'am.
I stiffened my spine and said, "Take me to him."
Hey, I know that lady.
He wheezed from his bed when I entered the hospital room. Jake had lost his wavy orange hair and even the hair on his chin. His eyes were puffy, his face bloated. I sidled up to his bed and asked, "Why are you doing this? Is this about our disagreement at the bar?" A wave of guilt enveloped me. Did I push him to refuse modern treatment out of spite? He chuckled before coughing violently. It took him several seconds to recover.
Wow. You really do think a lot of yourself, don't you?
Jake was attempting humor to avoid my question. Frustrated, I snapped, "Do not try to obfuscate the question. You owe me an answer." The truth was that Jake owed me nothing. He was the one who saved my life. If anything, I owed him.
I meant what I said when we met, Robin. I don't begrudge others, but I don't want to be beholden to anyone. Not even for my best friend.
I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that he was being obtuse, ignorant, and a prideful simian, and that he was allowing himself to die for no good reason. He turned to me with his beady eyes.
You're about to tear me a new one, aren't you?
I could no longer hold it in, as my orbs bloomed green. I put my head to his.
Hey, what's going on here?
I am sobbing, you stupid human, and the fault lies entirely with you. Jake placed his hand on my shoulder and patted me.
I suppose it does.
I stayed with Jake over the next several days as his condition deteriorated. All we could do without modern medicine was ease the pain with morphine. But Jake did not want to spend his last days in a coma. He wanted company, and he wanted music. So, I brought in a thing called a boombox to his room and played music that we enjoyed listening to on the way to work. It was close now. Before he lost consciousness, Jake struggled with simple words.
What was the most amazing thing you ever saw?
I have yet to travel the galaxy, Jake. I do not believe... And then I realized that Jake really wanted to hear the facsimile of my voice, to know that I was there with him. And a memory from childhood gave me something. Well, there was this one event that happened some years ago. There were these impetuous primates who had just invented an atomic weapon, and we expected that they would perish shortly afterwards, because that is what primitive primates do, is it not? Jake gave a weak smile.
Pesky primates.
Exactly, I replied. The song Drive by the Cars began as I continued. But these aliens surprised us. Instead, they decided to hold a competition on who could land on their moon first. It was preposterous, of course. All of our best scientists and professionals concluded that there was no way that those beings could land on their moon. They simply did not have the computational technology. They had to rely on slide rulers and handwritten calculations. But there was something that the experts did not consider. You see, there was no mature race around to tell them that they could not do it. And so, because they had not been informed about the impossibility of landing on their moon, they went ahead and did exactly that. The lyrics to the song warned me. Who's gonna drive you home tonight? I knew Jake was drifting from me now. I placed my head onto his, and Jake struggled as he placed his hand on my shoulder. I whispered, in countless civilizations we studied, we had never witnessed something so daring and so impossible. When your people landed on your moon, we cheered across the Consortium because we saw a fellow primate race accomplish something so wonderful. We saw the tenacity of spirit that speaks to your potential. Jake, you people are capable of such violence and cruelty, but you are also capable of such beauty, like your music. And I saw something beautiful in you when you raced back into that building. I believe humanity can do so much more with people like you, Jake. Jake? I no longer felt his hand on my shoulder.
Who's gonna drive you home tonight?
After the funeral, I headed back up to orbit where my doctor performed a routine checkup on my recovery. While they examined me, I played Jake's mixtape on my Walkman. It is difficult to explain, but somehow I felt as though he was still with me whenever I played the music that we listened to together. Maybe that is why humans always play music. I was so engrossed into a song that I was not aware that the doctor was communicating with me when they finally got my attention. I took off my headphones, which barely fit my cranium, and said, "My apologies, doctor. What were you saying?"
Colleague, I find this rather unsettling.
For a moment, I thought that they were about to inform me that I was exposed to something else and that I would be joining Jake in death. But they assured me that my health was not in question. So I asked, "What is it then?"
I've examined the records from your network, and I found an inconsistency. The radioactive elements that your network neutralized were composed primarily of uranium-235.
I tilted right and replied, "Indeed, it was used in the dirty bomb with the stolen material from the nuclear power plant." The doctor hesitated a moment and then said,
That's how it appears at first. However, a closer examination of the network records showed that part of the material was replicated.
I tilted left and replied, "That has to be an error. Humans do not have the technology to propagate a substance through replication. That would require nanites, something that they do not possess, no less can they manipulate." The doctor tilted right and looked very nervous. He said,
Then you can understand why I'm discussing this privately.
I got back into my coverall and attempted to make sense of what the doctor discovered. It simply did not make any sense. Humans did not have nanites, so how did Anthroprimus acquire it? And then the most horrifying possibility occurred to me. Someone aboard the fleet was working with Anthroprimus. I took the next shuttle to the UN headquarters in New York, where I was led into the regional manager's office. Having relayed a message of urgency, the regional manager canceled a meeting with the tribal delegations from the recently balkanized region of Yugoslavia and had his staff leave us alone in private. Outside, the G-type star had set, casting a long shadow over First Avenue. The regional manager shut the door and sat me down.
By the existentiality, you should be convalescing.
We were alone in his office, but just to be sure, I pressed my cranium up to his so no other gray would be able to listen in on what I had to relay, and proceeded to explain what I learned about the fissile material being replicated by gray tech. As a consummate professional, Regional Manager Bob took the news calmly.
It is okay, colleague. There is no way the humans will learn of this. Their technology cannot detect it.
I believe you are missing the point, colleague. We have a collaborator, possibly several among our fleet. They are in coordination with Anthroprimus. For what purpose I cannot speculate, but we must go on high alert immediately.
That will not be necessary, colleague.
I believe it is, I exclaimed. And then I caught something. A stray thought exposed and then repressed. It was agitation. At first I assumed the regional manager was frustrated at me for being irrational. But I pried into his thoughts. It was illegal, but I did so regardless. And I heard just enough. No, it cannot be. I stumbled back, horrified.
Robin, please, you must understand.
It was you. You planned this entire attack on Maple Leaf.
That is not the case. Anthroprimus came up with the scheme all on their own.
And when you learned of it, you ensured their plan succeeded. Why? And then I remembered. Because in our final briefing before we landed, I warned you that when confronted with a threat, that humans tend to push back. So you surmised that an attack by Anthroprimus would compel the Canadians to push back in defiance and incorporate.
The demonstration of what the opposition offered worked, and it saved more lives in the end, because now we are able to treat the victims of Maple Leaf with modern medical technology.
I wanted to vomit. I could not comprehend such conniving. The regional manager then placed his hand on my shoulder, briefly reminding me of Jake's hand.
That is why I did not want you at Maple Leaf that morning. I was so worried that you would fallen victim to the attack, but I could not stop the operation.
I threw his hand off my shoulder and glowered at him, seeing the regional manager for who he was. I said, Jake was right about us. He was right to fear what we were really about. He spoke about us being colonizers. I told him that he was being ignorant, that we were more evolved, that we were simply here to help them, because there were so few primate civilizations left. But it was I who was the ignorant fool.
We are saving these people, Robin. Do you not see that? They are a violent child race. Without us, they would be doomed. You know that. They need us, just as we need them.
For what? To sell us coffee? I smarted. Wait a second. He just said that we needed them too. How could that be? I pried into his thoughts, demanding, what exactly do you mean by we need them too? The regional manager walked over to a minibar and poured himself a bourbon and gazed out the window. The sky was near dark. The lights from the nearby skyscrapers dappled on his pale gray skin.
The war against the Sortakian order has been going badly, colleague. Far worse than we're willing to report publicly.
I was befuddled. What does our war with the Sartakians have to do with humans?
The galaxy, colleague, is rife with those cephalopods and their nihilistic ideology. They have the advantage of millions of years of civilization to our 100,000. We are surrounded, and the Consortium is the last best hope for all primate kind. You are an agriologist. You know how most primate races perished because of our violent nature. But with cruel irony, those of us that did manage to evolve, we lost the killer instinct to fight effectively. But not these humans. Look at them. They are filled with a capacity for inflicting violence and engaging in brutal warfare on a level that we could never achieve now. A skill that we have lost eons ago. They have a gift that not even our AI can replicate. They have the ferocity of the dead civilizations who sought to devour their enemies. We just need to redirect it towards the Sartakians. And we do this for the sake of all free will loving primates.
Jake once told me that there was no such thing as a free lunch. I thought his skepticism was a product of being brought up in a backward civilization. Sadly, it was wisdom. I trilled ruefully and said, I do not suppose you will be telling them any of this. The regional manager finished his bourbon and replied,
We have a greater responsibility than they could possibly imagine, Robin. We hold the burden of ensuring the prosperity for all primates. One day you will understand that. Until you do, you are under strict orders not to divulge what you know or what we discussed.
I shambled out of the UN grounds on the 42nd, unsure how to process all of this. Everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. Where was I to go from here? One thing was for certain. Despite how much the mere idea of manipulating these people revolted me, I had no intention of divulging what I learned. It was just too terrible. And then the thoughts I did not want to own emerged. The regional manager was an anal orifice, to be sure, but he was also correct. Humans were preternaturally adept at making war, and the Sortakian order was a grave threat to all of those who cherished free will. We had to protect ourselves. So, what did that mean? Was I now a colonizer? I hated myself that I could ever agree with the regional manager, but I could not deny it either. I staggered down 42nd in a daze. Most of the humans barely even acknowledged my presence. I was on my own again, and this time there was going to be no Jake waiting for me. All I wanted now was to be with Jake once more. A taxi pulled up, and I got in. "Are there any country western bars nearby?" I asked. The driver, who did not seem fazed by my presence in the least, nodded.
You bet. There's one in the West Village. It's called the Blue Oyster.
I checked to see that I had sufficient currency and said, "Then take me to the Blue Oyster." I then placed the Walkman headphones over my cranium, played Jake's mixtape, and gazed out the window to a sea of humanity who did not know what their place was in the galaxy.